Hey guys, welcome back to Reserved Investments on YouTube. So a lot of you guys have been reaching out and you're saying, hey Shawn, can you please do a video on what you think is going to be the next big thing in the overall collectibles trade going into the year 2022 and beyond? What collectible category do you think is going to go bonkers? What collectible category do you think is going to take the overall world by storm when we look at investing or speculating in antiques and collectibles over the short term? Now, obviously, I do not have a crystal ball. Obviously, as a consultant in the trade, I normally don't like answering these questions because they usually prove impossible to predict in most cases, as you're going to see in this video. But I do want to give credence to this because it is a fair question. You know, when I first started this channel, there were a lot of people that were disappointed because they thought that this channel would be a how-to guide of investing in the antiques and collectibles trade. And then when I started to gain traction, what is it that I tell you guys? Most of you would be better off just investing in financial assets and just completely forgetting about trying to invest in the antiques and collectibles trade over the long term with the goal of making money in these markets. These markets are too fickle. They're too niche. Demand is constantly changing. And as a result, it's very hard to predict what's going to be collectible X number of years into the future. Remember, guys, I've said this many times before on this channel. It is very easy to assess short-term demand and or popularity in the overall antiques and collectibles trade. You want me to prove it to you? In the year 2020, in the year 2021, in the year 2022, comic books, video games, Pokemon cards, all broke new ground and new auction records. Therefore, I can tell you right now, regardless of whatever content, whatever ideology I put out in this channel, in the year 2023, in the year 2024, in the year 2025, Pokemon cards, comic books, and video games are probably going to be selling for record highs in those years as well. It doesn't mean that I'm telling you they're good investments, because you have to compare the investment returns to that against opportunity costs of investing not only in traditional asset classes, but also other asset classes that you may decide to invest in rather than going all in on Pokemon cards or comic books or video games. Now, with that being said, this is very important because when we look at the trade from a long-term investment horizon, and what I mean by that, I'm talking 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years or more. You need to understand that that is very hard to predict. It is very hard for me to tell you while I'm sitting here in the year 2022 what's going to be collectible in the year 2072. And this is where I get upset with a lot of the trolls out there or a lot of the unsophisticated Timmies that discover this channel and they come into the comment section, they say, Shawn, you don't understand. Action Comics 1 is never going to go to 0. Or Pokemon cards are never going to go down in value because Pokemon is the most popular pop culture franchise of all time. Or my favorite, Star Wars figures are always going to be collected because Disney owns Star Wars. Have any of you out there had to sit through the Book of Boba Fett? Does anybody really believe that the awesome bounty hunter known as Boba Fett, who said the line, "He's no good to me dead," is really what they're showing us in the year 2022? I mean, honestly, is that really what Disney thinks Boba Fett is or is like? I don't even watch Disney Plus anymore for that reason. I'm so sick of Star Wars. The Star Wars that Disney has out into the marketplace in the year 2022 is not the same Star Wars I grew up with in the 1980s. And I want to make that very clear. And that should show you guys just how much these pop culture franchises, these certain icons, these certain licensees that you all covet can easily change. Nintendo could easily go down that same route, meaning maybe in another 50 years from now, Nintendo is no longer relevant. And I know that a lot of you guys are probably shaking your head with me saying that, but if you go back to 1981 and I talk about Atari, you would have never thought that Atari would have never been irrelevant. But today in the year 2022, let's be realistic, Nintendo is where it's at. Atari is where it's been. You see what I'm saying here, guys? It's very hard to predict long-term trends of collectability and demand in the overall antiques and collectibles trade. Now, what does this have to do with the question, Shawn, what's going to be the next big thing in the collectibles trade? Tell me, what should I be buying now, Shawn? Mr. Wise Wizard, what's going to really, if I go after this particular collectible, what's going to be selling for a fortune 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now? Even, Shawn, even if you can only tell me what's going to be selling for a fortune 2 years from now, I would settle for that since you're telling me that it's too hard to assess long-term trends. Well, Timmy, let's get in my DeLorean time machine and let's go back to the year 2012. And you're probably wondering, why to answer that question do we have to go back to the year 2012? I'm going to prove to all of you once and for all how wrong pretty much 80% to 90% of the investors, speculators, and collectors that operate in the antiques and collectibles trade, how they cannot gauge long-term trends. I'm going to prove this to you once and for all. So if we get in my DeLorean time machine in the year 2022 and we go back to the year 2012, this is probably what a lot of you guys don't realize. Now remember, I already told you at the beginning of this video, and you can look this up if you don't believe me, if you're new to this channel. In the year 2022, we are seeing record prices being paid for video games, comic books, Pokemon cards, vintage toys, and the like. I don't think anybody is going to disagree with that. Well, if we go back to 2012, you guys are in for a completely indifferent collecting environment. Back in 2012, there really was no high record prices being paid for graded video games. Pokemon cards and Magic the Gathering cards at that particular time were not selling for 6 figures. If you don't believe me, do your own research. Back in 2012, let me bring this to you in this manner. Back in 2012, we were literally only 3 years out from the great financial crisis of 2009. A lot of people were still hurting. And to be fair, in the year 2022, no disrespect if you are one of those individuals, with the corona crash, with everything that happened in between, I know that some of you out there are still hurting. So I do want to give you at least my empathy, my sympathy in that regard. I understand that. But what I'm saying is, back in 2012, nobody, even very few investors in the financial markets, predicted a 10-year run with the bull market that we've seen. Where back in 2012, a lot of people were expecting another financial crisis or another crash. There were a lot of people saying the debt, government debt, is at historic levels if you live in the United States, which to be fair, it is. But it wasn't enough to cause the market to crash. Instead, we had pretty much a run up, meaning asset prices increased in the financial markets across the board, and even to a lesser extent, more today when we talk about real estate. So where am I going with this? Well, if you go back to that particular point in time, you're going to see that there really wasn't any type of YouTube influencers back in 2012 that were shaping the antiques and collectibles trade. Auction companies weren't priming the pump. We didn't have grading companies in bed with auction companies. We didn't have grading companies engaging in market manipulation in the secondary market for some of these collecting categories. So as a result, if you wanted to buy a collectible alpha, beta, high-grade Magic the Gathering card back in 2012, you weren't going to pay anywhere near the prices that we're seeing in the year 2022. Same thing's true with Pokemon cards back then. Same thing's true with certain vintage toys. Same thing was true with certain video games and the like. Because remember, graded video games really didn't become a true thing until WADA got involved with the secondary market, certain auction companies, and then those prices reached historic levels. Back in 2012, people were not regularly investing in Pokemon cards, in Magic the Gathering cards, in Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and in video games for the long term. There were a couple of rare birds, don't get me wrong. I dabbled in that stuff back then. I saved some of that stuff. And yes, when prices started escalating, I sold into the market at that particular point in time. But overall, there wasn't the mass hysteria that we are seeing in the year 2022 with a lot of those collecting categories back in 2012. Now, why does this matter? Because when you guys ask me, Shawn, what is going to be the next big thing in the antiques and collectibles trade? You are not understanding how much the dynamics of the overall antiques and collectibles trade has changed within the last 10 years, or even in certain cases in the last 5 years. In the year 2022, going forward, you want to know what's going to dictate what the next big thing is in the overall antiques and collectibles trade? There's 3 sectors that are going to dictate this. The first is auction companies hyping a lot of these products up. And to be fair, not all of them are doing anything wrong. There's a fine line between market manipulation and marketing. Let's be realistic there. So I have nothing against the auction companies for sending out press releases about items that are selling for new historic highs, talking about items that have sold in previous auctions or record-breaking sales. There's nothing wrong with that. So that's the first group that you got to watch if you want to see what's going to be the next big thing in the overall antiques and collectibles. The second group is the grading companies. Never before have we seen so many grading companies pop up and cater to certain markets and also get in bed with either Wall Street or the financial markets or even auction companies, which I consider to be a big no-no, but that is a thing apparently, where grading companies, conglomerates that own grading companies are also buying up auction companies at present time. Grading companies are pretty much reflecting the hype that the auction companies want to see back into the market. So what's happening is auction companies are going, hey, you know, this is a thing, this could be a thing. Is there a grading company that caters to it? Or vice versa. You have a grading company that's coming into a market and they're saying, well, gee, how do we convince the masses of collectors, speculators, and investors that this is going to be a thing? Well, let's consign it to an auction house and let's see if the auction company can successfully market it to the overall masses. And they bid it up. And now people want to use our services because they're seeing our collectible card, our video game, our comic book, our rare coin in our auction house. And now they're utilizing our services because they think if they get their item graded, they can sign it to auction. They're going to hit those high prices when they go to sell. Do you see how that's both related? The third group of people that are really affecting the antiques and collectibles trade in the year 2022 that you didn't have back in 2012 are pretty much the YouTube segment. The hype-driven social media influencers, the hype-driven YouTubers out there that have a channel that come out of the gate, they're doing something unique, they're doing something with some of these pop culture collectibles, and they have like 100,000, 200, 300, 400,000 subscribers. People are hanging on every word. And they're pretty much taking the advice that a lot of these influencers put out as gospel. And you guys know, I have nothing against those guys. Some of them have interacted with me since I started this channel. I really respect a lot of them. It's just, I do not create hype-driven content in that regard. The thing that you guys got to understand going forward is every time you try to predict a long-term trend in the overall antiques and collectibles trade, in most cases, you are going to be proven wrong. And that's why I caution you guys from looking at these markets and going, oh, comic books are a thing in 2022. That means if I invest $10,000, $20,000 in a comic book in 2022 and it's a key issue, in 2052 or 2062, that comic book is going to be selling for $100,000, maybe $150,000 per year. There are no fundamentals that dictate that, guys. You know, I was reading an interesting piece that was done, I'm not going to say this individual's name, by one of the founders of Heritage Auctions. And they asked him, what does he think is going to be the next big thing in the overall antiques and collectibles trade? And you want to know what he answered? I'm going to give you this particular tidbit of advice now that we're 14 minutes in this video. He answered graded VHS movies. So that should tell you where a lot of these firms are thinking of going next. Now, I honestly have no opinion of that market one way or another. Personally, it's not a market that I would be speculating in or investing in, but I do know there's a lot of people out there that are nostalgic for vintage VHS movies and especially factory sealed VHS movies and seeing what happened with vintage video games, factory sealed video games, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there saying, well, you know, if a factory sealed video game from 1996, looking at you, Super Mario 64, can hit over $1 million just because the grading company refused to release population reports, why can't we do something like that with graded VHS movies or graded Betamax tapes? And I really tend to agree. I honestly think that the auction companies, the grading companies, and even some of the hype-driven YouTubers, they're going to want to make that a thing because there's a lot of money there. There's a lot of people that went to Goodwill stores or maybe some thrift stores and come across like a factory sealed Batman movie from 1989 or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie from 1980s, 1990s, and it's factory sealed. They send it to get graded, and they can now probably flip that for several hundred, several $1,000s into the open market. And as long as there's a buyer on that other end, guess what? That market's going to eventually take hold. So I tend to agree when a lot of the people who form these auction companies, a lot of people who create grading companies, and they grade a lot of this stuff, when they put out press statements or they do interviews, I always am one of the first that takes notice of what they are saying. Because at the end of the day, this is how I'm going to end this video. In 2022, the people that determine who the next big thing is in the overall antiques and collectibles trade, they are not the collectors. They are not the speculators. They're not even the investors. They're the people who pretty much have inside information because either they own an auction house, they own a grading company, or there's somebody who is running a hype-driven YouTube channel out there that is trying to get you so desperately to buy into their perspective. That's the end of the video today. I hope you got something out of it. If you didn't, let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.